Hello, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We're going to start on our recap period. Last 2 weeks we've been talking about JavaScript. I introduced JavaScript as a programming language. We used all we used the browser for was just using the console that's built into the browser to be able to just run JavaScript code, being able to open up a page that does nothing but run JavaScript to see exactly, how stuff can run. But now we're going a little bit beyond that. We're actually going to be interfacing with web pages now. So, this is where your knowledge of HTML and CSS from the first few weeks comes back into the picture. But I think it's probably a better idea to just talk about JavaScript, since that will be still the majority of the class we're talking about today. So it'll also be one of the first classes where we start making something that more resembles something you would actually create in reality. Although I will say that the class is on jQuery. We're going to be talking about jQuery for the next 2 weeks. And if you've ever heard from anyone talking on mailing lists or Stack Overflow or whatever that jQuery isn't what you want to use in some cases, it's true. There are a lot of better libraries that deal with a lot more sort of modern approaches to web development than what jQuery can provide. But it's still a very useful library to learn about, because we're going to be talking about basically some low-level interactions with the web, with our document that we can do. Makes things easier when we use jQuery. Quick question: is anyone warm? Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. If anyone is warm, they can open one of those windows up in the back. Feel free to do that. Okay. Right. Let's go ahead and get started with our recap. As usual, we're going to be we're going to be taking a look at previous code. So if you haven't done step 4 before, then please go ahead and get the class materials. This is also a good opportunity, if you already have, to do a git pull. If you're not familiar with Git, you don't know how to run these commands or what they do, then just go ahead to the FWD repository and download the stuff. But of course, given that this class does go in a series, I have covered Git, so chances are you should be able to run the git pull command wherever you have previously downloaded my class materials. Otherwise, just click this button, download zip, and you'll have stuff from last class, which is class 5. I've already created a folder for class 6 because that's what we're going to start with today. But yep, class 5. So let's go ahead and navigate to the series 10, class 5, and see what we looked at, what we put together last week. First of all, index.html. What's your fave color? Depending on what you type in, it will either say mine too or something else. So, that's a pretty straightforward interaction. That's something that you could do within a console instead of doing via pop-up dialog boxes. But let's take a look at the code behind that and how that all works out. First thing you'll see when you open up app.js in your text editor is that there's a whole bunch of grayed out stuff. Everything here is a kind of a faded out gray because all of this code is not going to run. Why is that? Well, because in JavaScript we have a lot of ways to comment code out. When you have anything at the beginning of the line with 2 slashes, then anything after that is going to be entirely ignored. So this is code that could run, but it will not because we have put 2 slashes in front of it. And here's some other code which we have surrounded in /* and //. Anything inside that is also commented code. So the 2 things we're looking at are line comments and block comments. Just kind of blanking out stuff that we're not going to actually be, the browser isn't going to run. And then more line comments and block comments there. But we should take a quick look at what's going on here. First line pretty much comes from our first week of JavaScript, where we are calling a function, passing in a string, and assigning the result or the return value of that function to this variable that we've just declared called should_show_alerts. So on this line, there's a lot going on. We are declaring a variable. We are passing a string into a function and calling it. We're getting the return value of that function and assigning it to this new variable should_show_alerts. So all that stuff is happening within this little bit of code. Similar stuff is happening here. We're creating a new variable called number of times, which is going to store a value of 0. So we talked about our while loop last week. A while loop is an iterator loop that basically means that this code is going to run indefinitely as long as number of times is less than 3. The first while loop that I showed you guys was essentially an infinite loop where we had something inside those parentheses that would always be true, and it pretty much crashed our browser tab because we couldn't stop it from going and draining my battery and doing whatever else. So you obviously want to put something in here that at some point will be false, or else you've created an infinite loop. So right now, number of times is less than 3 because it starts with 0, right? So we pop up these alert dialog boxes, passing in some different kinds of strings. Then we increment number of times by 1. That's what plus equals means. Plus equals 1 means now number of times is whatever its previous value was plus 1. So now it's 1, and then it's 2, and eventually it's 3, and this is false, so this code doesn't run anymore, right? So all in total, if this code weren't commented out, we would get 9 dialog boxes because of these 3 lines, because it's going to repeat 3 times, right? 3 times 3. Down here is the exact same code, but written with a for loop instead. So that is to say, this does the exact same thing as the code above, but it's a little more compressed because instead of using a while loop, we're using a for loop. A for loop inside the parentheses takes 3 separate statements. These are separated out with using semicolons. And but as you can see here, this code is pretty much the same as that. Instead of using number of times as a variable, where you're just using the variable I to shorten it even further, but otherwise all the code's the same. I equals 0, number of times equals 0. I is less than 3, number of times less than 3. I plus equals 1, number of times plus equals 1. These 3 things, starting out, that is to say initiating the loop, determining whether the loop should continue to run, and then finishing off each iteration of the loop, all happens within right here, these 3 statements. So that's how for loops are all separated out. The syntax is very dense. There's a lot of weird symbols going on here. It's more symbols than actual like letters and numbers. So you know, it's something you should take a close look at. But first, separating these out by these semicolons here is the best way of sort of starting to parse it. Yeah. So anyway, now we've got some code that actually will run or will not run, because here's a regular if statement. Should show alerts is going to be false, and so they should never see this. Right. But even though up here, should show alerts would be either true or false based on whether you wanted this to work, whether you enter the dialog box here. Unfortunately, it doesn't really matter what they enter in, because down here we set it to false, and so this code will never run, right? All right, so same stuff here. We're using prompt. You know, we've got confirm, alert, and prompt. 3 built-in browser functions, that is to say they only work in the browser, where they pop up a built-in kind of like dialog box that looks like a Mac OS or a Windows or whatever dialog box. Actually, depending on the browser, sometimes in Firefox it looks a little bit different from other dialog boxes, but whatever. Anyway, this prompt function, again, pops up a dialog box but returns a string based on whatever you type into the dialog box, and that becomes your favorite color. So here's where I introduce arrays. This is what we talked about last week. We talked about arrays, which are these series of different values here. As you can see, we're using these square brackets and then separating a whole bunch of strings with commas. And each one of these strings is a new value inside this array. So an array is essentially a list of values that is ordered. So that is to say, each one of these has an index. Each one of these has a specific order in the list. This one is index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is basically this is saying Jeffrey's favorite color is index of favorite color. This is basically what's going on here is that arrays have some methods living on them, or otherwise known as those. So they've got functions living on them. A function that is living on top of living in an object is referred to as a method. That's just what, you know, some terminology there. So when you hear method or function, it's kind of the same thing. It's just usually refer to methods as things that are, you know, separated by a dot, living on something like an array or an object, or in some cases a string or other stuff like that. So Jeffrey's favorite color is .index of. So what this index of function does is it takes in something and checks to see whether that data exists at a specific value, at a specific index within this array. So it's checking to see the index of whatever you typed in. So if you typed in one of these 5 things, then the index will be equivalent to whatever the value is here. So the index would be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So in any of those cases, the value will be greater than -1. -1 is the index that you get if you passed in an item that doesn't live within that array. You don't get an error or anything. You just get -1, which is the index of things that don't exist in the array. So as long as the value is greater than -1, then we alert out mine2, else we alert lame. So just running that code a second time just to see how it works. What's your favorite color? Red, lame. What's your favorite color? Goldenrod. Mine2, see? So depending on what you type in, checks to see if the index is greater than -1, and there you are. Any questions?
So,
yeah.
I see all commas and quotations there. So I'm just wondering what's telling that that's blue is one word, periwinkle is another. Like which one of those characters are?
Well, these are all strings because they start and end with quotation marks.
Okay.
So remember that a string is just a different type of data. And arrays don't have to have strings. This is an array of strings, but look, this is an array of a lot of different stuff. So here's a number, here's a Boolean, here's a function, here's an array, here's undefined, and then here's a string. So were you asking like why the commas aren't inside the quotation marks or whatever?
I guess if we have the quotations, then why the commas at all?
If you have the quotations, then why the commas at all? Because this isn't valid JavaScript. There might be some languages where this is fine, but it's not fine in JavaScript. Basically, spaces between different sorts of things assumes that you've got some sort of statement like var, type of, whatever else, and you're doing something after that, or I don't know. So no, you need to have commas separating values within arrays. Yes?
Is there any difference between single quotes and double quotes?
No difference. In JavaScript, single quote and double quoted strings are exactly the same. Up here, I was showing that if you have single quoted strings, you have to escape any any single quotes inside them using the backslash. If you have double quotes, you don't need to do that. But if you have double quotes, then you have to backslash any double quotes, escape them, to make sure that your string doesn't prematurely terminate. So, there's no difference. As for whether there's a preference, it just looks like the JavaScript community has pretty much decided on single quotes as the de facto standard, but really you're not going to get yelled at for using one or the other. In my older code, I would just willy-nilly use it back and forth, and no one cared. I didn't care, whatever. But nowadays, there are a lot of tools, a lot of command line tools that you can run to like sort of check the style of your code. Style is different than syntax. I mean, if your code has syntax errors, it's got typos, it just doesn't work, that's one thing. But then there's also sort of more of a stylistic choices. Indentation, whether you've chosen to increment things a certain way using plus equals or using plus plus or whatever else. And there are a lot of sort of like decided upon standards by different companies or different groups of people or whatever else. And you can use tools, they're often called linters, to determine whether your code is up to their standards, up to their style guide. So,
Can you use I++ too?
Yeah, you can. In JavaScript, you can. You can even use ++i. They both work. And so does I plus equals something. Most people prefer plus equals something because it's a little bit more apparent what you're doing, even though it's very obvious. Like a lot of programmers, even non-programmers, like a lot of them know that plus plus means +1, right? But either way, that's what some JavaScript people prefer to do, and I believe it, so that's why I use it. Okay, so let's see here. Next up, we have an array of numbers. It's the same as an array of strings. Again, it doesn't matter what values you put inside an array, but they just have to be separated by commas. So this is an array of numbers. We just call it R. Right here, we're saying R index 0 is equal to 1. This isn't actually going to result in anything. If it's true or if it's false or whatever else, it doesn't matter because we're taking this line. We're not assigning it to any variable. We're not passing it into a function. We're not doing anything with it. So this line doesn't do anything. But it will be true. Just this statement is true. It evaluates to true because that's what this triple equal sign does, right? It takes a value on the left, takes a value on the right, and turns it into either the value of true or the value of false. In this case, array index 0 is referring to this. So whenever you have a variable that refers to an array, and then you put little you put little square brackets right next to it, and you pass a value in. If that refers to an index within that structure, like this array, then you'll get the value out of it. So this will be 1, and 1 is definitely equal to 1. Let's see. So we got an array of strings. Same thing here. Index 0 of array of strings is hello, and then array of stuff, a varied array of random stuff. So let's walk through this code. It's also some dense code. It's got a for loop, and it's got a whole bunch of other stuff in it as well. So as we saw up above, we can create for loops. This for loop it declares the variable I and assigns it 0. Interestingly enough, oh, I'm sorry. Well, this is commented out. If this wasn't commented out, we could have not said, we didn't have to say var again because I was already defined further up the file. But anyway, we have var I equals 0, and we're saying that we're going to run this code as long as I is less than array of strings.length. So remember I talked about methods a second ago, a function that lives on some sort of structure like an object or an array or something. But there are also non-functions, just other types of data, which are referred to as properties. So length is a property of array of strings, which refers to the length of the array. So the length of the array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's 6. Oh, I'm sorry, this is an array of strings, so it's 5. So as long as I is less than 5, because that's what this is going to evaluate to, it's just going to get the length property of this array, and it's going to turn into the number 5. And then I is plus equals 1, right? So 5 times, essentially, if type of array of strings I is equal to strings. So string. So unlike up here where we passed in a number, 0, 0, right here we're passing in, well, a variable. And this variable, every time this for loop runs, is going to refer to a different number. So as you can see, after we run each loop of this, each increment of this for loop, I will be plus equals to 1. So it'll be 1 itself plus 1. So this will, during the first loop, equal 0, then equal 1, then 2, 3, 4, and that'll be it. So type of is a special keyword in JavaScript that when you put it behind a value, you get a string that tells you pretty much the type of data that it is. So we can learn about data types specifically by using the type of operator. Type of is not a function. Even though it takes some data that comes right after it, it's more of a built-in construct for the language, so it's not really a function per se, because it doesn't have parentheses around it or whatever. But it acts kind of like one. It results in a string. I'm sorry, it results in a string. The value of this string is string because that's what array of strings contains, right? So if type of array of strings is equal to strings, which of course it will in this case, this case, this case, this case, and this case, it will log out the array of strings. So console.log array of strings I. Where's the console? Well, of course, we've taken a look at the console in the last 2 classes. Easiest way to open it is just by right-clicking on any page, or on this page specifically, clicking inspect and going over to the console tab. So as you can see here, it has logged out hello world, my name, etc. Why did that happen? Where did that happen? Well, line 50 of app.js had a little line that said that these should be logged out. Sorry, logged out, not actually like logging out. So here we go, line 50, right? Console.log array of strings index I. So that's what's happening there. I think that earlier I had this code as array of stuff and array of stuff, array of stuff. So if I do that, how many console logs do you think there are going to be? There's going to be just 1, because this array of stuff only contains 1 string. So the console is going to log out, oops, whatever, hello, right? Because that's the only string inside this array of stuff. So it does type checking right here. Cool. So we also talked about objects. Objects are similar to arrays in that they store multiple values of data. In fact, arrays are a type of object. When you check to see what the type of an array is, it's actually going to tell you it's an object. So even though we use different syntax to denote that this is an ordered array of values, it really is under the covers an object. So what's an object? An object is a structure that contains multiple values inside it, basically. And in this object, the values are denoted by, let me get rid of this just because it's a little confusing. They're denoted by these different sorts of keys. Each one of these is referred to as a key. So down here, when we want to get the name from the object, instead of passing in a number, we pass in simply a string, obj name, and that's going to be Jeffrey. So an object is like an array, but you can call the values whatever you want. So what's the benefit of using an array if you can just use an object and call things whatever you want? Well, arrays are iterable. Arrays have special methods living on them that make it easy to loop through the values very, very easily, and they're better. They're more tuned, so you can just create a whole bunch of stuff in a row, and each one of these is going to get a key of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So this is just a more general purpose thing where you can name the values whatever you want. As you can see here, this object contains strings, numbers. It even contains an array. See these square brackets? That means it's an array. And then this array contains two objects of its own, right? So this object contains an array which contains objects. So this is where you get the structure. Objects can contain arrays, can contain structure. Objects can contain other arrays. You can go back and forth, like mix and match, nest whatever you want. Now I'm at the point, I wonder if you guys in the back would be able to crack the windows open a little bit, because there's a lot of bodies in the room. Thank you. Okay, so that's an object. As you can see, we can get object.name. We can also, if we have those 0, 1, 2, this is also valid, then you could just say obj0 as if it were an array. But you usually don't do that. You usually just use an array for that sort of thing, not a regular general purpose object. But right here, notice that this is a single equal sign instead of triple. That's something, of course, that will trip you up as you get started with JavaScript, but they mean very different things. This triple equals is checking to see if this is equivalent to that, and it results in a Boolean, right? It'll give you true or false. This, on the other hand, is an assignment operator, which means that anything on the right is going to be assigned to this. So the way that you change values within an object is this way. You basically say, after you define the object, to further change values, you need to use the assignment operator. You get the index of whatever you want to change, and then you just assign the new value. So now the obj name is going to be Bob instead of Jeffrey. Let's see, what else are we doing here? Array of stuff, index, array of stuff dot length equals object. Okay, that's a confusing line. What this is saying here is, remember how we were able to get the length of an array? That's actually something you can't get in an object. There is no such thing as length on an object. Because even though objects do have a certain amount of things inside them, it's hard to really gauge what the actual length of it is, because objects have these weird things called prototypes where you might or might not want to count the sort of values inside them. It gets really complicated. But by default, it's only arrays that automatically have this length attribute added onto them. So array of stuff.length, again, is going to be, what, 6, right? So we're saying array of stuff index 6 equals object. So that's one way that we're basically adding on a new value to array of stuff. But that's a little silly that we need to find out what the length of the array is so we can add it to the very, very end. Instead of doing that, we like to use a function that lives on arrays called push. So just like that index of function, that method that we had before, this push method basically takes a piece of data and puts it at the very end of that array, increasing its length by 1. And there we go. So push will just take whatever we pass into it and just put it right at the end of that, array. Okay, finally, we talk. Yes, sure.
When you put the equal, doesn't mean that you define this object. Can you go through all these?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah. So when you say array stuff, then the equal object doesn't mean you define it as an object. But the second line, the push object, just means you add it.
These two lines do the same thing. This line is, so we are assigning object to array of stuff index array of stuff dot length. But right now there is nothing at index array of stuff.length of array of stuff. Because remember that arrays are 0 indexed. So if an array has one item in it, its length is 1, but it only has something at index 0. So if you said array of stuff index 1, that would be referring to an index of the array that doesn't have any data in it just yet. So by saying array of stuff.length, we're basically saying put something at the very end of it. But this is a better way of doing that same thing. So either way, it's either assignment or it's just using the push method, which does that exact thing for you. Cool. So finally, we talked about functions. Obviously, we saw functions in the previous class. Push in the first class. Confirm, alert, prompt. We also saw some methods that live on arrays like push and index of. We saw one or two other ones. But we can also create our own functions. We use the keyword function to do that. So, hey, can you guys move somewhere else? Thanks. Right. A function is something that you can create, and then you can assign it to a variable. So just like we did up here, where we basically put this alert function right inside this array, just handle it. Down here, we're doing that same thing. We're basically saying, here's a function, and we're going to assign it to say hello. So what does this function do? Well, a function, when we create one, has a little set of parentheses, and it also has a set of curly brackets. These curly brackets are not the same as the curly brackets on this object creation thing. Even though they are the same symbol, they don't mean the same thing. This denotes a code block, very much like an if statement or a while statement or a for loop. All those sorts of things, have these curly brackets because anything that goes inside here is the code that runs as part of that function. So later on, when we run say hello, did we do that? No, we don't. Then, well, either way, if we were to run say hello, it would run this other method, log, on console, which just does hello. So it's kind of like, instead of having to pass in hello, the string hello into console log everywhere, we can just run this function, and that'll just save us a little bit of time, I guess, if we wanted to do that for some reason, right? But more useful are functions that take input, and even more useful are functions that provide output. So this function expects that when you call it, you're going to call it with something to pass into it, like give me something creepy. Oops. Creepy crawly. It's more spooky than creepy. Anyway, we're passing a string into this function call. So what will happen is that this function will essentially declare that string boo as message. So it's essentially creating a variable called message to be used within this block of code. As you can see, it's using it right here. And what this function does is it returns that message with a concatenation of milady at the end of it. It's pretty creepy, right? So that's great. But what does returning do? What good is that? Well, if we take a look at this very first line here, we see that by calling the confirm statement, we can then somehow assign the result of that thing to should show alerts. So that's what that return statement is good for. Whatever we return is what we can then assign to something else. It doesn't look like I actually got to the point where I actually assigned that to anything. But if I wanted to say var creepy message equals, oh, there we go, that was it. I did the exact same thing last week. Give me something creepy, wowzers. So now, whenever I type creepy message, it's the string wowzers milady, right? Because it took in this string, it added milady at the end of it, and stored, and then returned it to me, which I then assigned to creepy message, and now creepy message is that, right? So, right. One thing I should mention, by the way, and this same thing goes for whenever you're assigning variables like var x equals 1 plus 1 or something. If those values change, like if all of a sudden, well, you say like instead of var x, you say var x equals y plus z. If y plus z change somewhere down the road, that doesn't mean x changes. Same thing with give me something creepy. If I was to call give me something creepy again, like then that doesn't mean that creepy message changes. That has already happened. You know, that string has been generated, it's been returned and stored in this value. Just because we call the function again doesn't mean previously stored values all of a sudden change. It's a one-time deal. The fact that it was created by a function in the first place completely goes away. It's just a plain string that we get back as a return value. So this function takes 2. So if you called something like make sum 1 and 1, then it would assign 1 to addend 1. It would assign 1 to addend 2, and then it would return addend 1 plus addend 2. So if I wanted to say var sum equals make sum, then sum will be 2, right? Finally, let's see. Yeah. Oh yeah. Final thing that I want to talk that I talked about last week was scopes, function scopes, where variables that you generate within that you declare within a function scope overwrite variables that are outside of that function scope. In other words, there's sort of a one-way binding between what happens inside a function and what happens outside of it. So, for example, screw up my name, this function can have access to anything else that's happened throughout this page. Anything that I've written here, any variables that I've defined are accessible within this code. But if I run any var statements inside this function, like var my name equals something, then it overrides but does not replace the value that was outside of it. So even though we've got a var my name here and a var my name there, that doesn't mean that Jeffrey is going to change to dummers if I did this, like screw up my name. It's just going to console log out dummers, but if I type my name, it stays as Jeffrey. Because given that I've got a var in both places, that means I've declared a variable in the global scope, and I've declared a variable in the screw up my name function scope. And not the scope that will live on every time you call this function. It's just as long as this code is running, then var my name has been created, and it immediately gets, the term is garbage collected when it's all done. It's gone, because the function is done running. So yeah, that's kind of how it works. Right, so for example, if I got rid of var, then my name would refer to the global scope. So if I ran this again, I would do screw up my name. Sorry, first of all, what's my name? Jeffrey. Screw up my name. Now what's my name again? See? So by getting rid of var, the code has changed. Instead of just creating a new variable and logging it out, it changes this variable and then logs it out. See? So that's the difference when we use var. All right, so we've kind of eaten into our actual class time, so I'd like to go ahead and start with that. Just want to see, I might as well ask for questions, but real quick, no questions online. Any questions here? Yeah.
The 1 equal sign is assignment.
Yes.
3 equal signs is a test condition.
Are you asking about 2 equal signs? Don't use it. In JavaScript, 2 equal signs is what's considered weak comparison. It basically means this. Saying number 1 is equal to string 1. That's what happens when you use 2 equal signs. But it's not true. Number 1 is not equal to string 1, and you don't want to mess that up. You want to be able to do type checking to make sure that you're using the proper type of data. So by using triple equals, you don't have that problem. So I'd recommend never, ever, for any reason whatsoever, using double equals. Yeah?
There was a line to call a function.
Yes?
So what does that mean when you're calling a function?
I just call the function. You just put parentheses at the end of it. And when you call it with something, it's by you're passing something into it. You know, screw up my name doesn't take any arguments, and so it's not going to do anything with this. But yeah, calling a function means putting those parentheses at the end of it. Calling it and passing in an argument or passing in parameters means putting something inside those parentheses. So that's what it means. All right, any other questions? Cool, all right. Let's get started with our main stuff. Okay, a little bookmarker thing there. Hi, this is Jeffrey, and we are starting our web development class on jQuery. Gotta take a drink of water. We have, if anyone wants places to not burn their laps or anything, we do have a few more seats throughout, which people can totally scooch up toward. So yeah, there's that. Today we are going to talk about jQuery. What's jQuery? jQuery is a fast, small, and feature-rich JavaScript library. It makes things like HTML document traversal and manipulation blah, 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 simpler and easy to use. Okay, so what does that all mean? What's a library to start out with? What is a JavaScript library? A JavaScript library is a JavaScript file. A JavaScript file, you know, it's just like the one that we created. But the difference is that loading in this library, by default, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't like call any functions that automatically make the change, make your web page change somehow. All it really does is give you a number of different tools to use when you write your own stuff. So that's what a library is. In most languages, it's not a full functioning application. It's just something that your application can use just to speed up the process, just to use code that's already been written, not have to do it all yourself. So what sort of functionality does jQuery provide? Well, jQuery makes it easier than the built-in functionality in your browser to find elements on your web page, change them around, that is to say, move them places, remove them, copy them, change their attributes, change their contents, set up things like event listeners. We'll talk about that pretty shortly, but an event listener is where your web page is waiting for the user to take action on the page. Clicking, typing, scrolling, moving their mouse, you know, other sorts of user-initiated human actions are events according to the page, and jQuery makes it easier to listen for that sort of stuff and change things around a little bit. Yeah, so jQuery is definitely the de facto standard of JavaScript DOM libraries. So what's DOM? DOM stands for Document Object Model. DOM is just a fancy word for document. When I refer to the web page and I say the DOM, I'm basically saying the document, the structure of all the HTML tags, the interaction, the fact that we can interact with the page in the first place is called the Document Object Model. So I'm going to say DOM a lot. I'm basically just referring to the document. Okay, so what do we want to do today? I want to get started on a little sample web app, and we want to provide we want to add some interactivity to this web app. So if you go here, front-end web development, and scroll down here and click on this sample web app right here, it'll take you to Series 10 Class 6 Start. If you did a git pull, if you already downloaded the latest materials from my lecture, or then you should already have this stuff. If you haven't, then do a git clone or a git pull, whatever you need to do to download this information. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go ahead and clone or download the zip file of this repository. But I do highly recommend that you learn how to use Git. So anyway, going ahead and cloning this repository, pulling this repository, and navigating to Series 10 Class 6 Start folder is where I want you guys to start. And I have it right here. So this is what I'd like you to do. When you have this folder in front of you, I'd like you to take the contents, that's these 3 files here, and copy them to a place of your choosing. Obviously, as usual, I recommend that you create a folder in which to do your work for this class. Create an entirely new folder. Don't make it inside my folder because that's going to make it very difficult in the future to potentially pull more updates from me. So go ahead and create a new folder in your documents folder, your desktop folder, whatever, where you can start doing work of your own. And I would probably call the folder for this class Front-End Web Development Class 6, something like that. Or make a folder called Front-End Web Development and make a folder called Class 6. That's what I do. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these to a new place. Actually, I'm going to copy them right here. So you're not going to see this start folder, but I do. So when you're ready, when you have these files in a new copied location where you can start to make changes to them, let's go ahead and open up index.html and see what we've got for us. Okay, so this looks a little bit like Twitter. Twitter as it looked probably a number of years ago, because I haven't updated this design in a long time, because who needs to? No reason. But here we go. This is a little Twitter client. You can type something in here. That's cool. You can press this tweet button, but nothing happens. The only thing that happens is you type something in, and, well, interestingly enough, the content goes from there, this text box, into your URL bar. That's interesting. But that's something that's built into HTML. We've got some new elements that we haven't shown before in this class called form elements, like this text area and this submit button. But we're not specifically going to be talking about those just yet. We're more going to be talking about what this page can't yet do, which is put a new tweet on the page. It also can't do simple stuff like, on Twitter, when you start typing stuff in, you get a little character count that counts down to 0 or below, based on how many characters you have remaining, right? So we don't have that either. We also don't have the ability to do things like or retweet a tweet, that sort of stuff. So I want, throughout the next 2 classes, to provide some interactivity to something that we have here. Now, unlike the first few classes where we basically made welcome to my web page, how's it going? Here are some links to my favorite sites. Some more wordy, personable things. This, of course, is a less, personal experience. It looks more like an actual application than it does some sort of document that you would write into a word processor. Obviously, there's no difference, though. This is all HTML and CSS, just like we saw in previous examples. But a site like this, where it's focused on user interaction, it's focused on a user being able to make changes, contribute their own stuff, change things around, work on something, is what people refer to as a web app, where sites that, pages that are just like, welcome, about page, contact page, map page, directions, address, hours, that sort of stuff. That's more what I would consider a web site or a web page, something that's less app-oriented. But it's all the same technology. It's all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So really the big distinction is just kind of how much JavaScript you use, really, and how much interactivity, how many buttons you see on the page. So, it's obviously more of a spectrum than it is, this is a web page, this is a web app, right? So anyway, we really can't do much in terms of web application programming until we start using JavaScript, at least in a modern world where JavaScript really is the language to use, as opposed to using some back-end server to do all the thinking for you, but that's outside of the scope of this class. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me think. I think we might as well, let me think about this. There are 3 things that we can do. I think we might as well get into the meat and potatoes for this class and talk about a little bit more complicated stuff in the next class. The thing that we want to do in this class is be able to type something into the field and create a new tweet when we press the tweet button. That's fair. Let's get started. So this should be similar to what we saw in the last class. Go ahead and open this HTML file in your text editor. And we're going to scroll down to the bottom and add a script tag. We created a script tag in the previous page, but it was just a single HTML file with a single line of a script, and we didn't do anything else. But we're going to want to put a script tag right here at the very end of our body. Nothing goes outside of the body except for the head tag. There's head, body, and then the HTML surrounding it, right? But at the very end of the body is usually where people start to put script tags. So I'm going to say script source app.js, just like I did last week. Great. So depending on the text editor you use, there might be some text editors that automatically complete this code and also add a type or text/JavaScript or something like that. Not necessary. You don't need a type. Don't worry about it. Just script source something is good enough. Okay. Now, we're referring to a document that doesn't yet exist. We haven't actually created app.js. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and save app.js. So the first thing I like to do when I'm starting up a project and I'm not sure if everything is working properly, everything's connected the way it is, I just do this. It's a little hello world statement. This is going to log into the console, hello world, right? Just to make sure that I've loaded up app.js from within index.html and everything's working as I expect it to. So 1 second. Ta-da. There. That's what we need to do. All right. So let's see how that looks. Go over to here, reload the page. Nothing should change. But if you open up my very zoomed in console, you should see down here, hello world. If you don't see that, if you see something like an error message, not found, something like that, that means you probably did it wrong. You either saved your file in the wrong folder, you gave it the wrong name, you forgot to save it in the first place, you forgot to save your HTML file, you forgot to reload. There's a whole bunch of different stuff that could be going wrong. But, try to fix all those problems. And that'll be it. How are we doing? Good? Cool. So that means we've now got some JavaScript running on this page. Wonderful. Okay, so what specifically do I want to do? I want to make it so that when you press this tweet button, a new tweet shows up on the page. So listen to that sentence. When you click the tweet button, something happens. So what we need to do is we need to listen for the event of clicking on a button. So that is to say, nothing happens until the user initiates some sort of action on the page, which is specifically clicking this tweet button. I'm going to actually take it one step further and not just say clicking on the tweet button, but the specific action is that this form will be submitted. What do I mean by, what's the difference between clicking this button and submitting a form? Well, just because it's a button doesn't necessarily mean that the form, that all the data within this form submits itself. Right here inside our HTML, we have a form element. A form element is special in that if you click a submit button within that form element, which right here, if we just open it up, we'll see within the tweetbox actions is input with the type of submit. When you click this, this form does something special. By default, it reloads the entire page. All of a sudden, it just reloaded this whole page. If I was scrolled down or whatever else, I press tweet, scrolls you back up to the top, gets rid of everything, clean slate, just like the file was reloaded. So that's specifically what a form does by default. The cool thing about JavaScript is that we can listen for these sorts of events. We can basically say, oh, hey, that form is about to submit. Let's piggyback on that specific functionality and do some stuff of our own. Let's make it so we can run a function every time that form tries to submit. Cool? So this is the part where jQuery starts to come in handy. Now let me say something. jQuery is not a programming language. jQuery is not a special kind of thing that you can't do with regular JavaScript because jQuery is written in JavaScript. That is to say, everything that happens within the jQuery file is something that you can definitely write yourself. So if you can write it yourself, why copy someone else's work? Well, in the realm of open source, in the open source community, it's all about sharing. It's all about speeding yourself forward by depending on work that has been contributed to by thousands of people, that has been vetted to work well, work fast, meet people's needs. And if all that stuff is there for you and it's licensed to be free and available for everybody, it's got a very permissive license. That means it's available for use in for-profit projects, non-profit projects, it doesn't matter. Then why not go for it, right? It seems like it's you might as well. So that's what we're going to do. again, you can do this yourself. There is some plain JavaScript that you can write to do this. And I would recommend in your free time that you go ahead and find out how to do this. But that's not what this specific class is about. It's more about using jQuery to sort of make the process a little bit easier to remember in some ways. Okay, so in order to use the features of jQuery, we first need to download the jQuery file and include it from within our HTML file. So just click the big download button. Downloading jQuery. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing it. The easiest way, by far, is just downloading it into your folder. Just go ahead and take one of these links. I would recommend specifically taking the compressed production jQuery 3.1.0, downloading it straight into your folder. So, what's the difference between compressed and uncompressed? Is there a difference in how they perform? Is one faster than the other? The answer is no. They perform exactly identically. They are the exact same speed. They do the exact same thing. So what's the difference between compressed and uncompressed? Let's download both of them and find out. Oh, we got some torrents. I haven't been doing illegal stuff, watching Steam and Universe. Okay, so here's jQuery 3.1.0 compressed, or minified, and here's jQuery 3.1.0. Notice that jQuery 3.1.0 has 10,075 lines, whereas jQuery 3.1.0 has 5 lines. What's the difference? Can you read this? I can't read this. I don't expect you to be able to read this. But can you read this? Probably not, because you're all beginners at jQuery. But it's a lot easier to understand if you just take a little look at it and see, like, oh, look at all these comments. It's explaining exactly what's happening here. There are a lot of very, relatively understandable function names. Things that kind of make sense if you start to understand how it all goes. If you spend enough time reading this thing, you'd see what was going on. But this, no way, forget about it. So again, why use one over the other? Because jQuery 3.1.0 min compressed takes up kind of a fraction, or not a fraction, well sure, a fraction. What's 86 divided by 264? That's the fraction of space that this one does. That means it downloads faster. So, it seems like it might as well. So why do people use the uncompressed version in the first place? It's for the very, very select few who want to see exactly what jQuery is doing, want to understand how it's running, and want to be able to navigate through the code, debug it, step through it, and see exactly what it's doing. Especially for developers of jQuery, not developers with jQuery, who want to make changes to it. But honestly, this library is so battle-tested, tried and true, used in probably the majority of websites around the world, that I would say that there's probably no reason for you to say that something wrong is going on there, right? So I would say in most cases, the minified file is just fine. So let's just go ahead and keep this minified file. I'm going to drag it over, just right into this folder here, along with app.js and index.html and everything. Make sure that wherever you're dragging it, all this other stuff exists, including app.js, because that's where you're working, right? And now we can just refer to it with a script tag. So the stuff inside app.js wants to make use of jQuery. Given that, do you think that we should load app.js first, or do you think we should load jQuery first? jQuery first. Because if we try to run app.js first, and it's making calls to stuff that has been given to us, variables that have been declared by jQuery, it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. You're referring to a whole bunch of values that haven't been defined, reference errors. So that's why we always have to load our library, jQuery, first. Cool.
Sorry, what were you referring to? Oh, I see the script.
All right. So, are we done? Is our file completely interactive now? Is our page interactive? Will it work if we start typing stuff in here and all of a sudden doing stuff? No, of course not. Just because you've included jQuery doesn't mean that you all of a sudden all your work's done. You still have to program it. You still have to actually add some interaction. But you can tell that jQuery has run by going to your console and typing in jQuery. And if you get a function in return, that means you're in business. That means jQuery has properly loaded up on your page. If you haven't typed in the code properly, here it is. Type it in real fast. Okay? Cool. Great, you done it. So now back to here. You got jQuery. That's cool. jQuery is a function. So we can call that function. Remember, calling, basically just putting those parentheses at the end. So what happens when you call jQuery? Like that. Oh, you get something. You get some really weird thing, some strange sort of object. Actually, that's different than what I expected. I usually would get something that looks more like an array back. Is this an array? Yeah, okay. So this is a special, weird-looking kind of array that's got a weird name. And it's got curly brackets instead of square brackets. I'm not really sure why my console is failing me on this right now, but it's probably just because this version of jQuery is a little newer than previous ones that I've used. But anyway, that's great. You get an array of 0. So an array with a length of 0, how does that help us? Well, it depends on what you pass into jQuery. What you pass into jQuery, now this is where CSS comes back into play. Remember, we had an entire class on selectors. What do we mean by selectors? Let's take a look at our style.css. If we want to go over to sources and navigate to this little purple file here, and trying to zoom out, but my dev tools, there we go. My dev tools in Chrome are getting really clunky and really hard to use for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. So here are some selectors. They're very small because whenever I zoom in, it seems like my dev tools really kind of start failing me. But here we go. What part of these CSS rules are the selectors? The stuff that happens behind this first curly bracket, right? So here's a selector. Here's a selector. Here are 3 selectors, one after another: body, tweetbox field, input. So all these selectors mean different things. This selector is basically saying, apply these properties to the body. Apply light blue 320px 0 auto to the body. This one says, apply these 4 declarations to anything with a class of tweetbox. We know that because this little dot means class. So this is all stuff that we learned a few weeks ago. So that's all well and good. That's cool that we know how to write CSS selectors to select certain elements on a page. So why is that important? Because jQuery uses that exact same syntax to also find elements on the page. That's what the jQuery function does. When we call jQuery and pass in a string that looks like one of those selectors, then it's going to find something on the page. So for example, if I typed in the word body, it would give me back the body element in what looks like an array. That's interesting. When I hover over this thing, the entire page highlights. Let's try something else. jQuery, find the form. Check it out. When I hover over this thing, I get the form. What about something with a class of tweetbox? See the dot there inside my string? Look, I got the form again, because that's the thing with a class of tweetbox. What about something with a class of just tweet? Is there something on the page that matches this? Oh, look, there's 3 of them. 3 article elements with a class of tweet. 1, 2, 3. Article, article, article. So what jQuery does is it finds elements on the page based on the selector that I pass into it. So jQuery takes a string. That's great. And it gives me back an array of stuff on the page. OK. So fine. Now what? If we know that that's the entry point for jQuery, what good does that give us that we can now just reference elements on the page? Well, the special part is that this array that's given back to us is a special array. Remember how I talked about how arrays are just objects with a bunch of different methods on them, like push and index of, and the property .length and whatever else? Well, this array has those and a lot more. What jQuery gives us every time we call it is a special array that's been decorated with a whole bunch of additional methods and properties and things that help us out greatly, that allow us to do really cool things to the page. So for example, if I wanted to remove all the tweets on the page, I could say .remove. I would call the remove method on this array. So what do I mean by this? Is this an array? No, this is a function called the jQuery, but remember that it returns an array. So once it returns an array, I can then call the remove method on that array. So what does it do? It deletes everything. So calling that code has gone ahead and modified my DOM. Cool? So now if I call jQuery again, jQuery.tweet, nothing. That's an empty array. Everything's been deleted. Okay. Now, does that mean that my HTML file has changed? Has my browser just modified my HTML file? Let's find out. Nope, it's all there. So what jQuery is doing when it manipulates stuff on the page, it modifies your DOM. Again, your DOM, your document object model, is just the representation of all of the elements that have been loaded into the page via your HTML file or sometimes via JavaScript. It's just all the elements that are currently on the page, and that DOM can be changed. So essentially, you can think of your HTML file as like a blueprint for what the browser should initially build, but then you can use jQuery or just JavaScript, with the help of jQuery if necessary, to add additional stuff or change stuff around on the page. So kind of get the idea? Cool. So if you want to reset it back to the way it is, you just simply reload the blueprint or the HTML file, right? So here we are. We're back. Hello, world. OK. So we've seen that jQuery is a function that returns an array. And this array can then be called, can then have a whole bunch of other methods called on it that can do different things. One method that I'd like to tell you about is the method called on. On, allows you to specify a specific event that might happen to that element or that series of elements. For example, the submit event might happen on a form. A form might announce that it's about to be submitted. And jQuery makes it easy for you to attach an event listener to that event, to that element, that whenever it goes ahead and triggers that event, you can run some code. That's your listener function that goes ahead and just does something in response to that specific event. So let's see what happens. This is what it looks like. I'm going to start typing in app.js instead of doing it in the console. So in my app.js, I'm going to refer to jQuery pretty often. Instead of typing jQuery over and over, jQuery, that's going to get really old really fast because I'm going to be referring to the jQuery function very often. Fortunately, jQuery, the file, gives me a shortcut. Instead of having to type jQuery over and over, I can just type the $. $$ is it's a letter that you can put inside variables, and it doesn't have any special significance. It's just like ABC, XYZ, 1, 2, 3, underscore, dash. It's just another symbol that you can actually use inside variables. But jQuery is making a bet that you actually haven't used, that you haven't created any variables that actually have $signs in them. Because why would you? Unless you're talking about a lot of money or something, you probably aren't doing that. So when jQuery loads on the page, not only does it provide the jQuery method, but it also provides the $sign method that does the exact same thing as jQuery. So from here on, instead of saying jQuery parentheses blah, 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 we're going to say $ parentheses blah, 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 blah. So that's what it means. And if you've ever seen JavaScript that has a lot of $ stuff in it, that's probably because it's using jQuery. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the element that we want to attach the event listener to. That's the form that's going to submit, right? So it looks like this. We found the form, and now we're going to get back an array of form elements on the page. Now here's a question. What if there are multiple form elements on the page? What if we only want to listen for submission on one of them? Well, we could add a class to our form. In fact, it has a class of tweetbox, and we could then only attach the event listener to that. But isn't it kind of weird that we're doing this operation on an array that could have a whole bunch of items in it, and rather than just one? Well, it is kind of weird, but jQuery is focused on making the job easy for you. And the majority of methods that you can chain off of this jQuery function, when I say chain, I mean like jQuery something dot something else, like dot remove, dot on, other sorts of methods we're going to learn soon. It tries to do what you'd expect it to do. If the array has multiple items in it, it'll probably just attach that event listener to all of those items all at once. If it's remove, it'll just remove all of them. But if it's one, it'll act the same way in most cases. There's some methods that expect you to only have one thing in that array, but those methods will really just operate on that first item and forget about all the other ones. So, what I'm saying basically is there's no need to take that item out of the array. There's no need to go like index 0 to get that one element out of there. If you do that, by the way, if you try to get, this is valid. You can get that element. Like the difference being, someone tell me what the difference is between these two lines, the outputs?
The array.
The brackets, right? These square brackets here and no brackets here, because this is an array and this is not. This is an object which is being represented in something that looks like HTML. But once we get this specific form element here in our console, we can't do anything to it anymore with the help of jQuery. jQuery only gives us power when we keep things inside its specially decorated array that has all these additional methods living on it, like remove, like on, like there's a whole bunch of them. In fact, if you want to cut to the chase and find out all the methods that live on that array, it's all right here. It goes forever, right? So anything inside this list that starts with a dot is something that you can chain onto the that array that you received from jQuery. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. And it goes on forever. And I do not recommend you learn the whole thing. It's not necessary. So don't try to study this. It's not worth it. The web is the job of a web developer is open book. You always have access to this. So if you never ever need it, it's right here, api.jquery.com. API standing for Application Programming Interface, which is really just documenting all the different ways you can interface with this application for programming. So for this library to program your application. Okay, so anyway, we keep it inside this array. Again, remember, this jQuery function is going to give us back an array. And we're going to say .on. Now, .on takes at least 2 arguments. Remember, functions can take multiple arguments, like addEnd1 and addEnd2. You add those 2 things together. What on expects to take is a string for the first and a variable for the second. The string is going to refer to a specific kind of event that will be dispatched from an element on the page. So again, we're listening for the submit event. This special string submit, this has significance in the web browser. The form knows how to omit this specific event called submit. So this is not something specific to jQuery. It's not something specific to JavaScript. It's something specific to your web browser. The fact that your web browser can support this form element means that the form element can dispatch this special submit event. So we need that. Then the second thing we pass in is a function. So it's a little weird to see a function inside these parentheses for this on function call. We haven't seen the situation where you can actually pass one function into another function as you're calling it. That's really strange, right? What we're basically saying is, let's call this on function, and we're going to pass two things into it. Submit, and then another function. So remember that when we see this syntax, function, parentheses, curly brackets, that means we're defining a new function. We're creating it right out of the blue. We are making it so we can use it later. That's what this function keyword is for. If we wanted to do code right now, then we wouldn't have to run a function. We could just do the code, right? But in this case, we're creating this little function so that we can wrap some code inside these curly brackets to be run later. Yes?
So it's like a lorem ipsum type of thing.
Nope. I don't. What does that have to do with that?
I read my book.
Lorem ipsum is dummy text that you put inside a document to be like a placeholder for when you do actual stuff. In this case, we're not doing any placeholders. We're basically saying, here's some code that will get run later on. So it doesn't really have anything to do with lorem ipsum. Yes?
So jQuery will take as an argument either a class selector or HTML.
Yeah, you can pass in a bunch of different things into the jQuery function. The most common thing you're going to pass in is a string that resembles a CSS selector. You can also pass in a string that resembles HTML. You can also pass in an object, which is an element, which refers to an element on the page. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. We'll get to that probably later on, though. Right now, all we really have to worry about is using the jQuery function to find something on the page by passing in a string that looks like a CSS selector. So what we're saying here, forgetting about the fact that we even know any JavaScript in the first place, you can kind of read this as English. Form on submit function. Hey, form, when you submit, here's some code to run. That's the idea. So let's run some code. That's not a word. So get your, here's the part where your parentheses, your curly brackets, all those things need to be in place. You need to make sure that this function has a set of parentheses and it also has a set of curly brackets. You have to make sure that this on function call also has its own set of parentheses. This, unfortunately, is how JavaScript looks. It's parentheses within curly brackets, within parentheses, within curly brackets, within square brackets, within curly brackets. Just goes on and on and on. That's what it's starting to look like. So all I can say is start to indent your code just like we indent HTML to make it a little bit easier to understand that some sort of code is happening within some other block of code. So here's where the block starts. Here's where the block ends. Everything inside it is indented just to show that that is part of that block of code, right? So let's save this and see what happens when we go back to this page and press the tweet button. I got submit. Great. So if that didn't work, there could be a few things that happen. The first thing that could happen is you'll see an error message show up really, really quickly in this console, and it'll immediately go away. So it'll be really hard to read. You'll go, oh my gosh, what just happened? What? Okay. Another thing that might happen is you reload this page, and you immediately see an error in this console. If it's a syntax error, that means you had a typo. You should go back and reread this and make sure you didn't miss anything. If it's a reference error, that means that you might not have loaded jQuery properly, or you might be doing something else wrong. There's a whole bunch of errors that can go on here. But if you actually do see a dialog box pop up with this message, that means you wrote this code just fine. So I want to stop, I want to slow down and make sure that people understand what's going on so far. Anyone who wants to ask me any questions, yes?
To me, it's the indentation. I don't understand why or when that I don't know when to ask myself to indent.
Well, whenever you start a new line, after opening some sort of bracket, be it parentheses or square bracket or curly bracket, and then you close it, anything inside that you want to indent. The alternative to this is all of it being on one big line, which looks really difficult to read. Look at all this stuff happening at the end here. There's, parenthesis, semicolon, curly bracket, parenthesis, semicolon again. That's kind of hard to read. But when you kind of spread it out like this, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to understand that this matches that. That this also matches this right here. So that's all I can say, that when you need to break something onto a new line, because otherwise it would be really, really difficult to read, then I recommend trying to indent your code. If you're not at the point where you can understand like where indenting comes into play, or where you start to open and close things, or when it's time to start putting stuff on a new line, then just follow along, keep writing JavaScript, and it'll come to you eventually. Yeah?
So the dot on, is that specific to jQuery?
Nope.
Okay.
Well, on is specific to jQuery, but the ability to say dot onto something else is part of JavaScript. So if I were to split this out further, the first thing I could do is say var form is form. Now that I have assigned the result of calling this jQuery function and assigned it to form, which of course is that array that I was talking about earlier, now I can just say form.onSubmit. So what I'm basically trying to show here is that here's my jQuery function. I'm calling it, passing in this string, and getting back an array of all form elements on the page. That array I'm then assigning to this variable form. Now, again, this array, form, has some special methods on it that jQuery has added. So your first question about this .on being specific to jQuery, on is a method that has been added to this special array that I wouldn't have access to if it were not for jQuery. But being able to chain things like something dot something else, that's something that's built into JavaScript. That just shows that this is a method that lives inside this array. It's just part of this object. Yes?
The other the function is basically an object. But is the other targets of map is an object?
This is not an object, it's a function.
It's inside of the curly brackets. But the other targets of map.
Sorry, what are you looking at?
After the function,
Yes?
with the curly brackets.
This here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes?
Does it mean this is an object?
No, that's an easy mistake to make because it's an unfortunate part of the fact that JavaScript uses curly brackets for a bunch of different things. When you do like an if statement, you use curly brackets to start writing some code. When you use for loops, same thing. For loops use the same thing. But same with functions. But with objects, you also have brackets, but they don't mean the same thing as these three examples. These brackets represent code blocks. Everything inside here is going to be a series of different lines of code that will run one after another. But this is different. This, etc., is going to be a series of name-value pairs. Name this, age this, blah, blah, blah. It's not so much lines of code, or sorry, lines of statements, executable statements, as it is just values, 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 values. So in this case, this is an object. But in this case, because this curly bracket follows the special keyword function, it's going to be a code block. So this stuff inside here is not an object. It is just a series of different statements that will run when you submit the form. Yeah?
When you ran that, it came up with this page says, and then
That's right.
where is this page? Where is that?
That is defined within Google Chrome. Google Chrome is basically trying to say where this dialog box came from. It's something that you cannot modify for security reasons. It's basically trying to say if for example this alert came from some sort of page that you were on, and you didn't really know what was causing it to happen, it would give you the URL so you knew not to visit that URL anymore, right? So that's why that's in this dialog box, and it's why it's something you can't change. Yeah, it's built in. If you used a different browser, it might say something else. So it's Chrome specific. Yeah. So again, just going through it, we're finding all the forms on the page, storing them in this variable here, taking this special array and calling the on method that lives on it. And we're passing two things into this function. The first one is a string, submit. And the second one is a function, which we're creating right here, that is going to be a series of different blocks of code. We don't need to create this function right here. We could create this function called var submit handler equals a function. And then we just say submit handler. It's the exact same thing. It's just kind of spreading it out a little bit more. So, as you can see, we're passing two things into this array. String, and then a variable, and this variable happens to be a function, which we've defined right here. But all I'm saying is that we're probably not planning on using submit handler more than once, and so there's no need to assign it to a variable when we're just going to be passing it straight into this thing and not using it ever again. So, I could split this out as much as I want. I could even split this out further. Event name. This is starting to get a little silly, right? Like at a certain point, it starts to get less. It starts to get less readable, even though you're trying to split it out to make it like step 1, step 2, step 3. So we might as well just keep it right in there because it's a little bit more compact. It just lets us know when you do this, go ahead and do that. I will keep form out here because I think later on we might want to use form a little bit more. So let's hold on to that a little bit. Okay, so if you don't 100% understand this by this point, then, oh my gosh, no, seriously. No. Then it's completely okay. I do not expect you to, here's a little personal adage. I started learning JavaScript by learning jQuery. Those first two classes of JavaScript that I gave you guys, I didn't get anything like that. I just started going to the jQuery site and copying little code snippets. They have a lot of examples, and then just changing those examples around a little bit. That is exactly how I started to learn how to code, and that's not how you guys are learning to code, and I can't really tell whether one is better or not. But all I'm saying is that if you don't 100% understand this, the only way is to do it yourself. Really, just continue to keep making mistakes, keep fixing stuff, realize why stuff went wrong. Feel free to ask me questions in the meantime. That's what we're all here for, right? Okay, so there we go. Now, here's the problem. I'm going to type something into here, press the tweet button. It says, I got submap, and then it goes away. The page continues to refresh itself. It continues to get rid of everything that's in here. So that's going to be a problem. But before I fix that problem, let's continue on a little bit more and see why that actually is going to be a problem that the page completely refreshes itself. Specifically, what I want to do is add a new tweet onto this page. But as we know, if we refresh the page, it loads all the new stuff from the HTML. And we're not going to be making any changes today that cause the HTML itself to change in any significant way at all. Sorry, in any way at all. So what we have to do is modify the current DOM without refreshing the page. And that's what JavaScript is here to help us do. So anyway, let's go ahead and modify the DOM. Let's take some information, or let's add something to the page. Let's do that. So I'm going to get rid of this alert because we know that works. And I'm going to go ahead and find something on the page that I want to add a new item to. So let's take a break from JavaScript for a second and just look at the anatomy of this HTML file. This HTML file has two main portions on it. It's got a form, and it's got a section called tweets. So this form with a class of tweetbox, and a section with a class of tweets. So this section with a class of tweets has 3 articles inside it. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. An article element is just something you use whenever you're referring to a bunch of serialized data. something like a series of tweets, or Facebook posts, or blog posts, or comments, or news articles, or any sorts of things that are submitted by a person at a specific date with some content. Those can be articles, you know? So I just use that to distinguish it from all the other divs that I have all throughout the page. Well, this page doesn't have too many divs yet. Here's one. Anyway, this article has a link to my Twitter account in the form of an image, because there's a little image element inside here. And this div element, which is just a regular box, which has, it's kind of nondescript, it's just there to just kind of separate things out, has another div inside it and a paragraph. This paragraph has the actual content, you give love a bad name inside it. This div has another link to my Twitter account, right here, this clickable Jeffrey HW here, and then a little small element, which I'm using wrong, I should use time. Thought I fixed that. Which has the specific time ago that this thing was posted, supposedly, right? So that is the anatomy there. What I'm aiming to do is add a new tweet to the page when I press the submit button. So that means that this section with the class of tweets should have a new article at the top of it. The number of articles should be 4 when I'm done with this, right? And that means, and the way that Twitter works, if you're not familiar, is that it puts a new tweet at the very top, not at the bottom. It unshifts it instead of pushing it. It puts it at the top. So let's work on that. We have to learn a few new jQuery methods to do that. First thing we're going to do is find the list of tweets. Because without finding the list of tweets, we can't tell it to insert something new at the top. That's the first thing we have to do. So how do we find stuff? $. We use the jQuery function to find something. Anyone want to tell me what specifically we're looking to find? Tweets. Not tweetbox, that's the class, that's the somewhat confusing class name for form. But tweets seems to be that. So will this do it? You need a dot. That's right. If you don't do a dot, you're just going to look for an element called tweets, of which there is none. So you need a dot tweets. So we're looking for a method that allows us to put something at the very beginning. There's the concept of appending. Appending is putting something at the end. So like if you've got 1, 2, 3 and you append something, you're putting it at the very end. It's much like that push method that we saw earlier, where you can push something at the end of an array. But we're looking to put something at the beginning. So instead of appending, we're going to prepend something. So the method we're looking for is called prepend. So if we take a look at our jQuery API and search for prepend, insert content specified by the parameter, that is to say whatever we put inside these parentheses, to the beginning of each element in the set of matched elements. So the set of matched elements is going to be tweets. So we can link prepend, chain prepend off of this, and then pass something in that we want to put at the very beginning of it. So we can go like this. This looks really weird, but we just wrote some HTML inside this string. That's completely fine to do. Remember, strings are strings. Just because they have some brackets and slashes in them doesn't make them special strings. But in the eyes of jQuery, when we pass this special string in, when we pass this ordinary string in, it's going to treat it specially. Because it's going to look through it and say, oh, hey, there are things that look like HTML in here. I'm going to create new HTML elements, in this case just one, this article element, and prepend it to the beginning of tweets.
What's the difference between prepend and prepend to?
Prepend to basically switches these two. It switches the subject and the object. In this case, we're saying tweets, prepend this thing. In the case of prepend to, we're saying article, prepend this to tweets.
Okay.
So basically, you could switch it around. You could just put that there and that there. You know, if you wanted to use prepend to, it's just kind of subject. subject verb object or object verb subject. That's the difference. Okay. Yeah, that's why we see both prepend and prepend too. So let's try it out. That's weird. Look at that again. On the count of 3, I'm going to press the tweet button. 1, 2, 3. Did anyone see that? Anyone see how it like showed up and then went away really fast? Why is that?
You refresh.
It's because the page refreshed. As I said, when the form submits, it refreshes the page. So we want to stop that from happening before we can go any further. We have, in fact, changed the DOM on the page. That's great. But then the page reloaded itself and just loaded everything back up from the HTML file. So that's not very helpful. So how do we do it? Well, here's something special about this function. This function is being passed into this on method. Now, where does that function go once we pass it in there? Where is it being stored? Does it get executed immediately? No. This function is being passed into on so that every time the form submits, it calls that, right? But this function being submitted, it's submitted from within the jQuery code. The code that actually goes ahead and calls the submit method on this thing is coming from within that big jQuery file somewhere. And when it calls it, it passes in an argument. It passes in a parameter. So remember how we talked about functions that, function, right? When we do say something, then it's going to log out hi, right? Because we say something, we pass this in, something is now hi, and console.log something means hi shows up in our console, right? Well, this function, when it's called from within that big jQuery file, is also going to have something passed into it. Now that something is a big object which contains a lot of information about what just happened. It's called the event object. The event object contains information like what type of event just occurred. When did it happen? On which element did it happen? Other sorts of information. Anything that, like, where was your mouse at the time that it happened? If your browser supports mouse, movement, unlike the touchpad or whatever else, right? So all that information is going to be part of this big object that is passed into this function. So we can just expect that jQuery is going to give us something. And I'm going to call that thing being passed in event. So it's kind of like somewhere within jQuery, it's going saying like, call the function with a big object of things like type, submit, etc., blah, blah, blah. So just expect that somewhere inside jQuery this is happening. Okay, so now that we have this event, what can we do to it? Well, this event, again, it's an object. It contains a whole bunch of interesting stuff in addition to a number of methods, that is functions, inside this object that we can call to change exactly what happens when the event after the event has been triggered. One of them is called prevent default. That sounds pretty dead on, right? The default behavior of a form submission is that the page reloads. Looks like we want to prevent that default behavior, right? So we say event.prevent default. Bingo. That's exactly what we want. So again, where did this event thing come from? It came from jQuery. jQuery passed it into this function for us to use. Where does prevent default come from? Well, it also comes from jQuery. jQuery cobbled this event together, this event object together with all this sort of information and a few methods that are helpful to us. So this is jQuery helping us out. So when we call prevent default, after all this code runs and everything, the page will not reload. The event will stop doing what it was about to do, and that's it. That'll be the end of it. So let's see it happen. Go back over here. Tweet. Excellent. Let's try again. Tweet, kind of. I mean, whatever we type in is just saying hello, so that could be better. But it is adding something to the page and no longer refreshing the page anymore. And also, none of that tweet content is showing up there anymore. The URL is now clean. What was happening before was the form was trying to reload the page with all those parameters in the URL in case it caused the page to somehow render differently based on how the backend works. It's a little, again, outside of the realm of today's class and this class in general, but it tried to put that data somewhere, but it wasn't really doing anything. Now, this data is still not going anywhere, but at least the page isn't refreshing. So the next thing that we want to do is change this hello to whatever we passed in. Also, I realize I've been neglecting this. I got a lot of questions. Oh, good question, good question, good questions. Okay, sorry, so first question. The reason we load the JS after the section DOM, the same reason loading jQuery before app.js. Very good question. Why is it that we're putting these script tags way down at the bottom of the page? Why wouldn't we put them in the head of the page where we're loading up our CSS? Wouldn't it make sense to load our JavaScript while we're loading our CSS because it's a bunch of external files? That's the way that people used to do it. People used to put their script files in their head. So why is it all the way down there? The reason for that is because when JavaScript runs, it expects that sometimes can expect that certain elements are already on the page. When JavaScript loads, it does not wait for the rest of the page to render. If JavaScript was in the head, it would download, run immediately before even the rest of the page was even parsed or understood or put on the page. In other words, it blocks rendering. It prevents anything else from happening until the JavaScript file is downloaded and executed. So the reason we put it at the bottom is because, for one thing, we want our HTML and CSS to show up as fast as possible. From a perceptual standpoint, it makes it seem like our page is loaded faster. But also, because if we put our script files at the bottom, that means we have access to all these elements. We don't have to wait for all those elements to be ready for us. Those elements are there already. So we can call this code immediately and know that all the forms on the page have already been loaded. So that's why we put it down there instead of at the top. All right, so this question says, can you define the function to run on the $on event outside of the on function? Define it elsewhere in the app. Yes, I think I answered that question. The answer is yes. You can pass in that function instead of defining it inside those parentheses in case that makes it easier to use in multiple places or easier for you to read, whatever else. Okay, cool. Huh? Yes?
Sorry, so about the having the script at the end, I've seen more people put the script in the header and then they do the document ready.
That's right.
So is there a pro or con or accepted practice that?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is the ready function, the ready method. The ready method is part of the jQuery API. It's right there. Specify a function to execute when the DOM is fully loaded. So that sounds pretty good. So why aren't we using that? Well, we could use that. If we open this up and take a look at how it runs, it basically says, when the document is ready, run this function. And that means that we can put that anywhere. As long as we load jQuery first and then run our code, we can basically say, wait until everything else is loaded and then do this thing. So why don't we use it? Well, because our script is at the very bottom of the file, or at the very bottom of the document's ready by definition. All the CSS, all the HTML has already loaded by that point, and so there's no need for us to wait for anything else to be quote-unquote ready, since it's all there. Also, putting it at the bottom, again, no longer blocks rendering. It makes it so the HTML and CSS shows up faster. So even if this JavaScript file does nothing to start out, doesn't really actually do any processing until the document is ready, it still has to download, which takes time. And then it needs to be parsed, which also takes time. So putting it at the end means we don't have to do a document ready handler. and we also don't have to wait for the actual JavaScript file to load for us to be able to see the document. So those are all the reasons why I don't recommend using document ready anymore. It's not necessary. Yeah, good question. Cool. Okay, so where were we? We wanted to change hello with the value of whatever was in our text box here. So first of all, how do we get the value of our text box? Well, jQuery to the rescue. Let's check it out. First of all, how do we get the text box? Well, this is the only text area on the page, so we can get it that way. We could also get it by using tweetbox field, 2 underscores. We could do it that way too, if I wanted to. Both ways are equally valid. I would say on a web page that might have multiple text areas, you know, like a big form with a lot of different fields you can type into, that you don't want to do it that way. But on this page, since we only have one text area, you can do it however we want, really. I mean, I'm probably going to keep it simple this time around, so I'm just going to say find the text area. So that's great, text area. But once we've got that text area, what can we do to get the value of it? Well, jQuery has a special method called val. The val method gives us the value of the text area. It is empty string. Let's try it again. Hello. Great. So the val method, living on this jQuery array, gives us a string, which is the value of that text area at any time. So whenever we run it, it's just going to take the current value of that thing, and we can do whatever we want with it. Cool, right? So that sounds great. We want to get the value of the text area at the time that the form is being submitted and do something with it. So let's get that looks good, right? We are finding the text area and then calling the val method on it, which gives us a string. Then we're assigning that string to new tweet value. That make sense? Is it going to work? Do you think it's going to go ahead and put the new tweet value on the page? No, why would it? We're not telling it to put the new tweet value on the page. JavaScript has no idea what new tweet value means. That's just a variable we define. We've stored it. We haven't used it. What good is a variable when you don't actually use it after you define it and assign something to it? So let's use it. We can use it right here. How do you do that? Well, via concatenation. Remember, concatenation is stringing multiple strings together using the plus operator. And it looks like this. Again, this is going to be a place where people are going to get their syntax wrong. Make sure that you've got 2 sets of quotation marks, apostrophes, whatever. And they're right here, and they're right here. Here's a question. Why don't I surround this in quotation marks? It's a variable, right? If I surrounded this in quotation marks, it would literally put new tweet value, N-E-W-T, that whole thing into the thing. That wouldn't really be helpful. But when I refer to the value, it takes whatever this is, and it puts it right in the middle there, because that's a string. String plus string plus string. It's going to be a bigger string. Cool? Any questions online? All right. Let's try it out. Great. So we are definitely halfway there, living on a prayer. Any questions? Cool. So I guess it makes sense to everybody. Let's continue on. The next thing that we want to do is actually put everything else there. We want to put my name. We want to, you know, like put everything else there. We want to take all this stuff. So there's two things we could do. The first thing we could do is copy and paste this entire article and try to paste it in to a giant string that we string all together and, you know, like make it a very, very, very large string in our JavaScript file. That's something you could definitely do. That's something people used to do a long time ago. They would basically take a big template and just throw it, you know, just a big string as an HTML template and throw it in there and just like take out little bits of it and replace it with certain stuff. That is possible. It's okay. No, it's not okay. It's very dirty. It's really kind of like well, okay, well, so in future classes, I'm going to talk about a few different libraries like Angular and React. And what these libraries do is they often start from pages that have no or little to no HTML in them. They only have like a body tag, and then the JavaScript inserts all the other HTML. And so essentially in those languages, you're adding a whole bunch of HTML inside your JavaScript to put into the page. In the case of jQuery, we usually don't like to do that. In jQuery land, we usually like to use stuff that's already on the page somewhere, or that's somewhere that we can like harness it and then basically make a copy of it. You know, or maybe even like a hidden thing that we can use later. We're going to make a copy of that, and then we're going to change out little bits of it and then put it back into the page. And that's going to be the remainder of this class. Yeah, you got a question?
HTML5 is basically something like what you're saying. Is JavaScript ready or?
Nope. HTML5 is just the newest version of HTML. It doesn't have anything special to do with jQuery that HTML4 didn't. It has a few new elements. It has 1 or 2 new features, but it doesn't make it necessarily any easier to work with JavaScript than HTML4 did. When we refer to HTML5 often, we're referring to more than just the language itself. We're also referring to a whole bunch of new features that have been programmed into browsers. The whole idea of evergreen browsers that update themselves, you know, so always getting new features and whatever. In fact, I would say that the era of HTML5 is we're kind of even beyond that at this point. We don't even really call it HTML5. We just call it HTML. We call it the front end. We call it just front end coding. So no, HTML5 was certainly programmed or certainly created by people where JavaScript heavy pages were in mind when they created it. But that doesn't mean that it has anything special to do with it that makes it like a completely different functioning language than that. So not especially. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's see here. Where are we at? We want to take one of these big articles and put it in here, but we don't want to copy and paste this whole big bit of HTML and put it in there. So how do we do it? I would recommend, in this case, that we simply make a copy. We are fortunate in that we already have a tweet on the page, and we can just make a little shortcut. I would call this a shortcut. I'd call this something that you might not want to do in the real world, but in the case of this little sample app, we can take one of these things, make a copy of it, and put it right back on the page after a few modifications. So how do you copy an HTML element? In jQuery land, it's called clone. Create a deep copy of the set of matched elements. A deep copy means that not only does it copy the element, but it also copies all of its children. So it's just a complete carbon copy all the way down of all new elements that match some other elements that have already been on the page somewhere. So you're making a clone of it. So how do you do that? Inside here, I want to find a tweet on the page, and I want to clone it. That's how I find a tweet. Is it really, though? Is that how I find a tweet?
It's like everything that's marked tweet. It's how you find everything that's marked tweet, right?
That's right. That's how I find everything that has a class of tweet. So it's going to be this one, it's going to be this one, and it's also going to be this one. So it's going to find all of them. So I don't want to clone all three. I only want to clone one of them. Remember how this is an array and I could do this? Well, that's great and all, but I can no longer use clone. I can't do this. This is not possible. Do not do this. The reason I can't do that, I deleted it because I don't even want you guys typing it in. The reason that you can't do it is because when I get index 0 of this array, I'm no longer in jQuery land. I've taken the element outside of that special array with all that decoration on it, and now I can't use special jQuery methods unless I wrap it a second time in jQuery, which I'm not going to do. So how do I just narrow down that collection to one item? I use the method first. First returns an array of one item. Whatever the previous array had, but only the first thing in it.
Can you use last as well?
I think there is last, yeah. There's last, and then there's also like, I think like get 0, or no, I'm sorry, maybe eq 0. Yeah, I think that will also get the first element there. But yes, in this case, first is good enough. Like I just said, you can't do that. So let me show you the difference between this and that. Let's do dot tweet dot first, and then let's do dot tweet index 0. What's the difference? No brackets. Why is that important? Well, let's check it out. So this is a clone. How do I know this is a clone? Look what happens when I hover over tweet. See, it hovers. It highlights that on the page. Now look what happens when I do that. I hover over it. Nothing. That's because it's a clone. It's not that element that's on the page. It's just a new element that I haven't put on the page yet. It basically took the element, made a copy of it, and now I've got it sitting in memory, that big cubby hole in the sky, that I can then put somewhere else when I feel like it. Now let's try tweet index 0.clone. Clone is not a function. It doesn't work because this element, this plain element that has no jQuery wrappings around it, doesn't have a clone method. So I can't do that. So that's why I use first instead. In jQuery, you're going to find that you can chain methods one after another. This method returns something that you can then chain another thing onto, and then you can chain another thing. It just keeps returning a new jQuery collection that has all those methods on it over and over and over. So tweet.first.clone. So let's say var new tweet is tweet.first.clone. So eventually, I want to do this. I want to prepend the new tweet to the list of tweets. So go ahead and change this around. And this code will work. But, well, let's see what happens right now. Let's see what happens. My battery's in the red. Anyone want to lend me, how many minutes do I have left? 19 minutes? Might be able to do that. But if anyone wants to pass up a charger real quick, that'd be helpful. Cool. Anyway, thank you very much. I'll be short this. Don't want to stress people out. Cool. All right. So let's do it. Let's see what happens when we run this code. Every time I press tweet, it creates a new element. And it puts it at the beginning. I didn't substitute the value. I don't really know how to do that. Do I do like new tweet dot value? No. Because new tweet is a nest of new elements. So in order to change a specific element, I need to find that element first. Remember that this article, this copy, has this link inside it, this image, it has this div, it has another div, it has this link, it has this small, and it has this paragraph. Paragraph seems to be where the actual tweet content is. So I could find the paragraph inside it. I could also find the class of tweet content. And just in case this thing has another paragraph in it that I'm forgetting about, I'm going to use the class tweet content. I find it to be, I think that's doing it a little bit more specific, especially in case that I decide that it's not a paragraph anymore. Tweets might have multiple lines, right? Possibly even multiple paragraphs. What if they increase the limit to 10,000 characters like they said they might? You know, like, might be more than a paragraph, right? So anyway, to do that, we need to find something inside here. So can we do this? Is that going to work?
Does it have to have dot first?
Yes, but is that going to really work? Is that going to refer to our clone, or is it going to refer to the first tweet content on the page? It's going to refer to the tweet content, first tweet content on the page. This $sign thing, passing in a selector, is only going to find stuff that's currently on the page. Even if we've stored some clones in memory, some elements we haven't actually put on the page yet, it doesn't look for them. It doesn't find them yet. It needs to be on the page in order for us to use the jQuery element, the jQuery function, to find it. So this isn't going to work. So how do we find something within something that we've already made a definition of, something that we've already found, something or that we might have even cloned? How do we find something inside it? Yes? Like new tweet dot tweet content? Nope, not going to work. Sounds nice, but no, it's not going to work. But remember, this new tweet is still that jQuery array that has all those methods on it. One of those methods is called find. And find works just like the jQuery function in that you pass in a selector, but it limits its results to whatever it finds inside that element. So find allows us to find something inside a nest of elements or a jQuery collection of elements. Even if that collection isn't even on the page yet, it still allows us to change it around. So that's great, we found it, but now what do we want to do to it? Well, I think we want to change its value, right? But this isn't a form element. Only form elements have quote-unquote values. So just like this val function only works with form elements, text areas and the like. So how do we actually change the text content? We're going to use another method called text. And whatever we pass into text is going to completely change whatever the value is inside it. So what do we want to pass into it? New tweet? Is that right? New tweet value. If we passed in new tweet, then it would basically take this, turn the HTML into text, just a whole bunch of brackets and everything, and try to put it inside there. And that's not what we want. Instead, we want to get this new tweet value, which is the value of the text area. I think that might be it. We want to get the text area value, get the first tweet on the page and make a clone of it, find the tweet content inside that clone and change its text to the new tweet value, and then put it back on the page as the first thing in the list. Let's try it out. Oh, yeah, semicolons are okay. They're not necessary. They're not necessary. But thank you for being my linter. Like I said earlier, a linter is a thing that goes ahead and checks your style. My linter would have complained saying, you missed a semicolon. Still, it doesn't really make a difference. It's kind of a stylistic thing in most cases. So let's try it out. Ta-da! So there we go. It worked, as you can see. And what it did was first stop the forms from actually submitting. 2, get the value, whatever I typed in. 3, clone the element. Just because it cloned it doesn't mean it was on the page yet. We needed to run this prepend thing. Here's a question. Could we have done these two things in different order? Could we have pre-printed it first and then changed the value? Yes, we could. We could have done that. But it would have been a little strange. There is the possibility that it would have put it onto the page and then changed the value, and maybe for a split second, like a single millisecond, if you're very good at, if your eyes have a very high refresh rate, you would see the old content before it actually changed to the new content. And that's not necessary. You might as well make all the changes that you want to make first before actually putting it onto the page. So, you know, the last step is to update the document with all the latest stuff, right? So that works. Two more things I want to change. First thing is I want to get rid of what's in this field. Second thing is I want to change the time that I posted this. Well, let's change the time first, actually. Let's do that, because that's pretty easy. Excuse me. So first thing we need to do is change the time. First thing we need to do is find the time to do it. Something smells weird. Yeah, something's burning. Fire extinguisher.
No, that's not a laser cutter.
Oh.
The wind is blowing. It's spinning out.
Oh, cool. So it's toxic dust. So anyway, so I think that changing the time of the tweet having been posted is very much like what we just did with changing the tweet contents value. Now, I don't actually want to find out what time it is right now. If you use Twitter, you'll notice that it says something like now instead of 1 hour ago or whatever. I'm not actually going to teach you right now how to like create a jQuery date object and format the time into something special. No, I'm just going to put the word now in our tweet. So it looks like this. New tweet dot find what? Tweet time. Cool. And we want to change what? It's text. That's right. We're going to change its text to now. We just pass the string now into this text function, and it changes the tweet time of the tweet. So these two lines are very similar. Okay, let's see that work. Now, there you go, cool. That's not gonna like magically update as we leave this page open. That's something you can do some other time if you feel like it. It's actually pretty complicated. But in the meantime, everything we do there, now. It just says now instead of 1H. By the way, every time that we call this function, which tweet do you think it's copying? Do you think it's still cloning this you give love a bad name one? It's not, right? It's the first one. It's always cloning the first one. So that means that it's taking this one and then changing the content. So, you know, that it's just gonna, the first one will always change. Every time we run this code is different. So, last thing, and then I'll let you go for the evening. Let's clear out this text field. So, first of all, have we previously gotten this text field? On which line, give me a number, on which line have we found the text area before? Line 6, right? So I can get it again, but let me say something about that. It is a little, it takes a little bit of time for jQuery to traverse your entire DOM to find an element. It needs to go through every single element and say, does this match? Does this match? Does this match? Does this match? It takes a long time. I don't know how many elements there are here. Does it have an actual count? No, it doesn't. But there's a lot of them. And there are some pages that have thousands, if not millions, of elements on them. And so that means that every time you call the jQuery function to find something that matches that selector, it's going to have to make that match 1,000,000 times. Right? So that's kind of taxing. I want to cut down on that. Here's a question. Is it ever necessary for me to find the text area on the page more than once? No. So I could do this. And then I could change this. I'm sorry, not textarea.val, sorry, just textarea. And then I could change this to textarea.val. And here's a question. Is this as efficient as it can be? Am I finding the text area only once on this page?
Should it be outside of the function?
It's in the function. So that means it's going to find the text area every time the submit thing gets called. That's not the end of the world. I mean, you know, could be a lot worse. But again, it's only that text area. It's not like the text area is going to magically disappear, unless you expect it to, in which case you need to code differently. But we don't need to find it ever more than once. So why are we doing this inside this function? Can't we do it up here? I say so. Yep, we can. We're only finding the form once. We're only finding the text area once. Great. Never have to find it a second time. We always have access to it via the text area variable. Okay, so the last thing we want to do after, right before prepending the text, the tweet, or after, it doesn't really matter, is do text area. Now, we want to change its value. On line 7, we got the value of the text area by doing textarea.val. That returned a string. So is there another function that we have to call to change the value rather than getting the value? Interestingly enough, in jQuery, it's the same method. It's actually val. But it's not just textarea.val like this. This is just going to take the string. It's like, here's a string, and nothing's going to happen. We're not assigning it. We're not storing it anywhere. It's just going to find it, and that's all it's going to do. But if you pass something into val, if you pass an argument into val, all of a sudden it changes from a getter to a setter. That's just a terminology some people use to say an element that will receive a value or change a value. Depending on the number of arguments you pass into this function call, it either gets it or sets it. So check it out. This is an empty string, right? Two apostrophes, that just means string with nothing inside it. A string with a length of 0. And that's what we want to change the value to, right? So we understand why this is different than that. This is getting, because we're not passing anything in. It's simply saying textarea.val, oh look, that's a string. That's all jQuery is going to do for us. It's like, it's a string. But when we do this, it's not going to give anything back to us. Well, it might. It actually will give the text area back to us in case we want to chain something and do another method afterward. But in this case, the fact that we're even passing in a string with nothing inside it means it's going to set the value to that. All right, let's try it out. And bam, it's gone. So is it really gone? Where does compose new tweet come from? We didn't put that in our JavaScript. Where does that come from? Compose new tweet is what's known as the placeholder value of this text area. You can add a placeholder attribute to a lot of form elements, and that gray text will automatically show up and disappear once you start typing something in. That is part of HTML. It's not part of JavaScript. So if in JavaScript you set the value to blank, the placeholder will show up again because there's nothing there. So yeah, that's it for our code. Let me see. I had one more thing to talk about really quick. I kind of forgot, so I think that's okay. I'll remember it and feel bad about myself, but whatever. Yes?
I'm interested in how you said about jQuery. You learned jQuery. Could you give me like a tip on how you attack learning jQuery? You said you learned jQuery, learned JavaScript, jQuery. That sounds good.
That's how I learned? Yeah. Well, so as I was saying, I started to code JavaScript in around 2008. And before I knew anything about the language whatsoever, I just started to use the jQuery library to write code that looked a lot more like this. This doesn't look like regular JavaScript because of all of the different sorts of chaining things I'm doing. I'm calling jQuery by using this $sign over and over and over. And then I'm saying this dot this dot this dot this. This dot first dot clone. This dot val. This dot find dot text. This dot prepend this. Like that whole sort of chaining on and on, chain this, chain that, is a sort of syntax that is valid JavaScript, but it's something you'll see more often when you're working with jQuery. So what I'm saying is I learned all those basics that I taught for the last 2 weeks. And I learned about variables, I learned about functions, I learned about iterators, I learned about creating functions and all these different data types by just starting to type code using the jQuery library. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that I learned JavaScript in that way. This whole class was about jQuery. So there was that. And we'll keep talking about it next time. Yeah?
I have a question about prevent default.
Yes?
What it does is it also prevents stuff from going into the URL.
Yes. Well, yeah. Submitting, by default, the form submitting itself causes the page not to reload itself, but to load a new page with all those query string parameters in the URL.
So how do you send the information to that?
Well, that you can, from this event, well, from within this thing, and we'll learn how to do this in a few weeks when we talk about Ajax, and that's something that jQuery makes easy. We can take the form values, take any other values that we want, serialize them into a big object that we can then send back to the backend. So that's something we'll talk about in a few weeks. Yeah, it's an extra step for sure, but it's something that happens within this function. Yeah, so that's it. Oh yeah, I'm not going to be here next week. I am on vacation in Boston for my cousin's wedding. So hooray, Boston in the summer. That's going to be exciting. Anyway, I won't be here for on Monday, and when I'm here on Monday, I'm usually not here on Thursday, so that's going to be the situation. No lecture or lab next week. So we're going to continue learning about jQuery in 2 weeks, which is great, since I'm sure this class broke your brain, which means you have 2 weeks to catch up. So excellent. But I will be here on Thursday. I will be here this Thursday, so you can help try to fix your brain on Thursday. Come for that. I will send out a simple assignment that's similar to this. It's about creating a little to-do list that allows you to add new items to it, when you click a button. So that'll be cool. So look out for that. As usual, subscribe to one of my mailing lists or join the Facebook or Meetup group and donate to NoiseBridge. It's all right here. And thanks for coming. And I'll see you guys on Thursday. And then I'll see you guys Monday, August, I don't know, 29th? Is that it? Yeah, 29th. Ta-da. Cool. See you then. Goodbye. Sorry. All right. Really quick, I think I explained prevent default again, but yes, that is what stops the form doing from what it usually does. And again, find allows you to take any sort of element and find something inside that element instead of finding it throughout the entire page. See you later.